Today's theme is Our Lady of Love, and I'm going to read you that meditation from Our Lady of Love. I'm crouching on Lenny's face. That's okay. So just open your heart and settle yourself to be in this room this morning for our beautiful time together, and hear these words. I am love, calling you home to my heart. I am your mother, you are my child. There is nothing to fear and only love to be. Cast aside both doubt and the walls that have held you back from the world. Enter the sacred dwelling of the heart and open the gate wide. Our Lady of Love brings guidance that love will present a way through the struggle with great intelligence. The guidance is for you to remain who you are and to trust in that. Our Lady of Love, inspire me, instruct me, empower me to be your sacred warrior in the world, fearless and compassionate, a force of your light to help illuminate the darkness. Amen. 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 Right, beautiful. And just an absolute perfect theme, Our Lady of Love, for our speaker today, who I've had the pleasure of knowing in a really special way from years ago. Lenore Perrott, a psychologist who practices in Wayne. Her card and a beautiful sign-up sheet for Lenny's work and some workshops that she does, all available back where you signed in. But Lenny and I were in a group together at the Dalesford Abbey, and you know, it's a poignant memory. I did that group with my mom, and Lenny was our fellow traveler, and so I saw the beautiful soul that she was in sharing really special time together there. So it's such a joy that she's here to share with all of us here at the Franciscan Spiritual Center. Lenny is a gifted psychologist with so much training, lots of work with the diocese, with private practice, with the Young Institute, and we're talking about some shared interest in Gestalt work. So it's my pleasure for Lenny to share her story and her work with you on the Enneagram. Lenny, welcome.
Thank you. Well, when I arrived today, Sister Julie said to me, because she knows the Enneagram, how are you going to manage to get this across? And I usually teach it over a 6-week period. Once a week. I did it in the fall at the Crooksburg Center in Radnor. So I was saying to a friend, you know, to prepare for this and to narrow it down, because I'd like you to leave with an understanding of personality types and maybe even a sense of your own. And I will be giving out a bibliography with some selected books. You might want to check one of them out and read more on it, and also some web pages that websites you can go to. All the websites are people with whom I've studied or trained. So let me give you the background. Around 1988 or 89, my aunt, who is a sister of St. Joseph, said, Lenny, I think you might be interested in this. And she gave me a little cassette tape on something called the Enneagram. And the speaker was a monk that you may have heard of, Father Richard Rohr. Okay? And he is really big, or at least he was then, into the Enneagram. Well, I couldn't believe it. I was so fascinated. And I love to read, so after I listened to the tape, I went right out and bought a great big thick book called Personality Types by Don Rizzo and Russ Hudson, two men who later became my teachers. Well, that was not the right way to get introduced to the Enneagram. I learned later the best way is something like this, orally, because the Enneagram is very rich, very deep, very complex, and very confusing to just go to a book. So I got discouraged, I put it aside. Now that was 88 or 89. Fast forward to 2000, I was at a professional business luncheon. And one of the speakers was a woman named Sarah Aschenbach, who at the time was working in the corporate world, and she used the Enneagram. And she made it come alive. And I went up to her, I said, geez, I heard about this so long ago. I'm a therapist in private practice. I'm not in the corporate world, but I want to learn. Would you work with me? So we began to meet weekly. And she had me take an inventory, which you can take by going online. I'll tell you which website later. And she said, before you take the inventory, read the little description of each type. There are 9 types, and I have handouts for you. And circle a couple that sound like you. Now the good news is, one type is not better than another. Because at the highest level of development, every one of the 9 types are beautiful. At the lowest level, you're in big trouble. But most of us are at the average level. People that are doing spiritual work, psychological work, they're getting into that higher level of development. Under stress, everybody dips down. So I read the 9 types. Keep in mind, you're going to have a little of all 9 types in you. But in the end, you have one dominant type. So I circled 2 types that sounded like me. Took the inventory, and sure enough, I came out very high in both of those types. But there was another number that I scored high. And I said to Sarah, I don't think that's my type. And she said, well, the first rule of thumb, Lenny, is nobody can tell somebody else their type. Now, if somebody's really, really unhealthy, you may be able to guess their type. Or if you've known somebody for a long time and you've seen them under stress and you hear what they talk about a lot, you may be able to tell their type. How many of you are familiar with the Myers-Briggs? I figured. Okay, here's one of the differences. The Myers-Briggs is about behavior. The Enneagram is about motivation. Unless somebody shares with you, you don't know what's the driver for someone. And I'll give you some examples of people that can look like one type, but they're really another. So Sarah started working with me and asking me questions. And oh my gosh, it turned out that 3rd type was my type. Well, I became so fascinated with it. Now, I've had years of therapy, all of which has helped me. But I wish I had understood the Enneagram many years ago, because it put some final pieces of my puzzle in place. Why I react the way I do, why I've made some choices in my life. Where did that come from? What was the driver? So I said, I need to get training because I wanted to do it with my clients. So in 2001, I began to study with Don Rizzo and Russ Hudson. And so that I could then use it with my clients. I especially love when I am seeing couples, because they just fall off the couch laughing at each other because they see, like, one of the types is the reformer, and this woman was the reformer. And of course, she's pretty unconscious. She didn't recognize it, but her husband's like, oh my God, describes her completely. And he happened to be the peacemaker. Interesting. Those types often hook up. That's the other thing. Well, who gets attracted to what type? So, no, I'm okay with this. So let me, before I give you the picture of it, go into the history a little bit. The symbol itself is Greek. And it looks like that, and you're all going to get one of these in a minute. The word Enneagram,
Keep your mic up to your...
the word Enneagram comes from the Greek word, Ennea, E-N-N-E-A. It means 9, and it's 9 points on a diagram. Okay? And we know the symbol comes from the Greeks, but actually the Enneagram goes back to the early Christian desert fathers in the 4th century, where they talked about the 7 capital sins, and then we added a couple more with the Enneagram. And then we have the Kabbalists, if I'm saying that correctly, or Kabbalists, the Jewish sect, in the 12th century. They had some doings with the Enneagram. And the Sufis, the mystics of Islam. And I was just reading something the other day in the paper that the Sufis are being persecuted today. They're a very peaceful, beautiful group, the Sufis. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. So, when did it come to the United States? In the early 1970s, there was a Jesuit priest that was sent out to California. California's always on the cutting edge. And he got training in it, brought it back to the community, and they began using it with their novices. Don Rizzo, who later became my teacher, he was studying to be a Jesuit priest for like 8 years. And then he left, and then he developed it even more. Okay. How is the Enneagram used? Well, first of all, it's used spiritually, in spiritual direction. Some of you may have heard of a Sister Mary Carboy, Sister of St. Joseph, who taught high school together back in the early 80s at St. Marie Goretti in South Philly. And then she went on to become spiritual director. And she's trained in the Enneagram and knows it well. So it's used spiritually. More and more psychology is getting into it. And a couple years ago, I got certified as a life coach. And depending on what a client needs, they might need therapy, they might prefer coaching. It's used in the coaching world. One of my mentors, and his website is on the bibliography, his name is Mario Sikora. Mario also trained with Don and Russ, but a number of years ahead of me. He's an executive coach, and he works in the corporate world. And he's got interesting things on his website. Well, about almost 2 years ago, I got an email on Good Friday from the human resource person at Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals in New Jersey, saying that she had been given my name and they were interested in me presenting to 3 different groups of managers on the Enneagram. Well, if you guess my type when you learn the types, I almost had a heart attack because I'm not in the corporate world. And unlike some of the personality types, when they get a challenge like that, even if they never know anything about it, they're like, oh yeah, I could do it. Well, not me. I was like, oh my God, Johnson & Johnson. So I thought, well, because I'm pretty prompt with my emails, but I thought, it's Good Friday, they'll give me a little space. So I'm racking my brain. What can I, and I thought of Mario. So I called him up and he was like, wow. He didn't mean it the way this sounds, but he's like, why'd they call you? What's that? And that's what I couldn't figure out, why they called me. So I said, Mario, would you be interested? He said, yes, but I'll have you come along if they're interested. Thank God I called him. Put him in touch with this woman, Sarah. She wanted, like within 2 days, a proposal. I could not have done it, but he does it all the time. And he told me what he was going to ask money-wise and what he would accept just to get his foot in the door with Johnson & Johnson. And he's such a dear. He said, whatever I get, I'll split with you, which he did. So we wound up going up to New Jersey, and they were managers from all over the world. And, well, you talk about perception. When I walked into their building, it was kind of a cold building and guards and name tags, and I thought, well, I wouldn't want to work here because atmosphere is so important to me. Well, then I get into the rooms. The people love working there. They're hugging each other. This one's coming from Asia, this one here. One woman said to me, I started working here in October. I love it. And my whole view was so off. It was such a fascinating place. Well, at lunchtime, I asked the human resource person, why did you happen to call me? And she said, well, one of our bigwigs knew the Enneagram, and he wanted us to find somebody. And she said, I called a lot of people. You're the only one that returned the call. Oh, so let's talk a little bit about just what it is. It's been described as a map of the human psyche. And it is an extraordinary tool, ladies, for spiritual and psychological growth because it illuminates unconscious parts of ourselves, things that we don't necessarily see. And that's pretty fascinating. Your personality type is a combination of nature and nurture. You know, we believe that we're predisposed genetically with a personality type, and then based on your birth order, your gender, what's going on in the family, your personalities get formed. I'm the oldest of 5. I've me, then a brother, 3 sisters. And of course my brother would not take the inventory, but my sisters all did, and their spouses did, and all our grown kids did. And one of my sisters and I have the same type. Another sister, 2 other sisters have different types, and yet we had the same family, same parents. So that's always interesting. You're not going to be the same type necessarily within your family. Richard Rohr always says, keep in mind that your type is 1/9 of the truth. There's 8 other truths. I just had a big discussion with my sister. We were going to New York for a niece's baby shower. And one of my sister's daughters-in-law is with us on the train, and she happens to be the peacemaker. Good thing, because my sister could drive you nuts. And my sister is crushed that her daughter-in-law is not telling her the sex of the baby that's due this August. Because she found out that her daughter-in-law told her mother. And I said, well, you know, it's her mother. Well, you know, I'm close to you, and she's so, and I said, and she goes on, she said, I don't think she's understanding my point. Now, here's the thing about the peacemaker. Lauren, the peacemaker, they will just smile. They're not going to fight with you, but you can't budge them. They don't budge. And so because Lauren is just smiling and being, and my sister says, Lenny, can't you tell she's not hearing me? I said, Claire, you said it 20 times. She heard you, but she has a different point of view. And so I reminded her that her point of view was 1/9 of reality, and there are 8 other realities. So you want to keep that in mind. The other thing that's wonderful about and then the last thing Claire said to me, I can't argue with you when it comes to the Enneagram. So I think she's going to get the training. So you're going to have a little bit of all 9 types, but one's going to be more dominant, okay? Now, what I'm going to give you now is, okay, here we go. This is going to be what we call a thumbnail sketch. Here you go, Karen. I think we're good. Of the 9 types. And then I want to point some things out to you as we go through this. And by the way, stop me at any time with questions. So let's start by looking at type 1. People who compare reality to a set of standards. Now, 1 is the reformer, so you might want to write that on there because you don't have it memorized yet, but it's on your chart. So reformers, when they're healthy, they're objective, they're balanced, they can be morally heroic. When they're really unhealthy, they're repressive, they're critical, and perfectionistic. Now I'm going to tell you a couple things. Each type lives in their particular world. For the reformer, they live in the world of ideals. They tend to be very idealistic. And that's a good thing, unless it's overdone. And then they become, you know, kind of perfectionistic and what did you say? And payment, yes. And that's the truth.
That's
also,
a technical term.
Also,
That is a medical term.
each type wants something. Type 1, the reformer, they want to be right. They want to be. See now, so as we're doing this, see what things ring a bell for you. Okay? They want to be right.
About yourself, right?
About yourself, yes, yes. And here's the funny thing about the reformer. Every type has a characteristic temptation. For the reformer, the characteristic temptation is, but I am almost always right. And the funny thing is, often they are. But that's hard to live with somebody that tends to be always right. Another name for the reformer is the perfectionist. I remember seeing a panel of types, and at one point they had a man and 2 women, and that flowers are making me think of it, and there was a coffee table in front of it with a beautiful arrangement of flowers, and the man said, let me give you an example of my perfectionistic nature. He said, you see that vase of flowers? And they look great. He said, that one little flower needs to be moved over. That's perfectionist. Yeah. Okay. Here are some people or characters that we think might be reformers. We don't know, but based on their persona. So, for example, this would be a good one. St. Pope John Paul II might be a reformer. Mary Poppins, Lucy in Peanuts, Gandhi, Joan of Arc, The church lady used to be on. I don't know. Yeah. If anybody ever saw that movie years ago, The Odd Couple, Felix? Yeah. So it gives you a sense, a flavor of what they look like, positive and negative. All right, let's look at helpers. Helpers, type 2. These are people who see the world interpersonally, and they define themselves through service to others. They may be selfless, loving, and giving, or dependent, prideful, and hostile. Now, 90% of women score high in the helper. That's the way God made us. So don't be surprised if you go and take the inventory that may not be your type, it just may be you have a lot of it. Helpers live in the world of feelings. Feelings. And what they want to be loved. Now, again, pay attention because I like to be right. I want to be loved. But I'm looking now as we're going through this, which is the thing that pulls me the most. Some of the people we think may have been helpers. Remember Mr. Rogers? The Tin Woodsman in The Wizard of Oz? Eleanor Roosevelt? Do you remember Melanie Wilkes in Gone with the Wind? HR people? I think with type 1 and 2, and the sisters here could maybe collaborate if you find that often in religious life there's a lot of 1s and 2s, you think? Yeah, I would think so. Helpers and reformers, yeah. Okay, again, stop me if you have questions. Type 3, the achiever. Yes?
Could you talk about some of the negatives of type 2 person?
With type 2? Yeah, the prideful part about a 2 is, and someone I know who is a 2, and she's a wonderful 2, and she's always giving, but someone in her extended family, not a blood relative, and she does a lot, is completely unappreciative. And there's a sense of the pridefulness comes from where I've done so much. They use the stereotype of the Jewish mother, after all I've done for you, and they have done a lot, but they're expecting some kind of a payback. And they can become very dependent on getting that connection and that love from the other. And then they can get the hostility. And this person I know feels extreme anger. We'll get into that. Because if you look at the picture of the Enneagram, you will notice an arrow connecting the helper type 2 to the challenger type 8. I'll explain that a little later. Okay? All right, type 3, the achiever. People who measure themselves through external achievement and the roles that they play may be truthful, accomplished, and exemplary, or conniving, competitive, and false. Now, Mario, my friend, who teaches who works in the corporate world, he said, Lenny, you can only imagine in the corporate world, they're all like, we've got to come out the achiever. And he has to explain to them, again, it's not about behavior like the Myers-Briggs. Every single type, if you're healthy, you could be at the top of your field no matter what your type is. Okay? So it's nothing to do with are you a success or not. It's more what's driving you. So the achievers, they live in the world of aspirations. They're always aspiring to something. And what they want is to be recognized. Okay? Examples of that would be Bill Clinton. And they call him Slick Willie.
Willie.
Yeah. Oprah, marketing people, Scarlett O'Hara, Lady Macbeth, Captain Kirk, Star Trek. Okay. Oprah, did I say her? Yeah, Oprah. Okay. Type 4, the individualist. Now these are people who live principally in their imagination and feelings. May be artistic, articulate and inspiring, or whiny, elitist and negative. And 4s live in the world of imagination. They want to be understood, and they also want to be unique. 4s love to be unique. The joke about the 4 is a woman could be the toll taker on the Walt Whitman Bridge. She's got a uniform on, but she'll have something that will stand out. A pin, something in her hair. There's something about a 4. You find a lot of artists, let's see, and writers. Tennessee Williams, we think, Edgar Allan Poe, Rudolf Nureyev, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. So artists, musicians, a lot of them. John Lennon, Tennessee Williams. 4s are very much ruled by their moods. My 4 clients will say to me, you know, Lenny, when I feel like it, I will go to the gym, or I will whatever it is. And I have to say, you know, change the behavior, the feelings will follow. And you're like, oh, they're waiting for the feelings to change, and then they'll change their behavior. Type 5, the investigators. People who pull back from the world and live in their mind. They may be wise, far-sighted, and knowledgeable, or abstract, stingy, and schizoid. Schizoid meaning not very relational. I find that the 5s that I've worked with tend more to be on the introverted side. And by stingy doesn't necessarily mean with money, although we use Scrooge as an example. What, dear?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
They can be stingy with their ideas. They live in the world of ideas, type 5. And they want to be an expert on something. It was so helpful learning the Enneagram because one of my sisters, who's an enthusiast, her husband is an investigator. And they live in D.C., and we never see Scott very much, and yet Peggy claims he really likes our family. Well, when we learned the Enneagram, Peggy said, yep, this is a man who by training is a lawyer, but he's an expert on ancient maps. And he's an expert on ancient pieces of silver flatware and things like that. He'll do little gallery displays down where they live. And it's something that most of us don't know about. Some of the examples of investigators, we would say Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Nietzsche, Scrooge, Emily Dickinson, and Beth in Little Women. Type 6, the loyalists. These are people who anticipate the world's dangers. They may be courageous and loyal and effective, or cowardly, masochistic, and paranoid. You know the joke about paranoids, right? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that somebody's not out to get you. They live in the world of responsibility. And they want to be secure and safe. Okay? They are the worriers of the Enneagram. You know, they see a different little spot in their face, and for sure it's melanoma. And they're going to think they have to call the undertaker. Some 6s that we think may be 6 would be the Cowardly Lion, Archie Bunker. Remember Gus Costanza in Seinfeld? Robert Kennedy, Woody Allen, Tom Hanks. Type 7, the enthusiast. These are people who look for multiple choices and positive futures. They may be well-rounded, affirming, and generous, or narcissistic, escapist, and insatiable. And these people live in the world of dreams. And what they want is to be upbeat and satisfied. They don't want to be bothered with problems. They often are multi-talented people, but they can become jack of all trades and master of none if they don't get grounded. We'll talk more about that. Examples of type 7, Richard Branson, Virgin Airlines, John Belushi, Robin Williams. Look how some of them wound up. 7s are known for excess. You know, if one glass of wine is good, 3 are even better. So that they have to watch that. Marianne Williamson, Elizabeth Taylor, Mozart, Auntie Maine. Type 8, the challenger. People who need to be strong to prevail over circumstance. They may be powerful, protective, and committed to a cause, or destructive, excessive, and sadistic. They live in the world of control, and they want to be in control of themselves and whatever environment they're in. A couple of 8s that I know, when they talk about drinking, they'll never, these two anyway, never going to have to worry about becoming addicted, because they both said to me, they don't even know each other, the thought of losing control. So they're very careful, always in control of themselves. Examples, FDR, Picasso, Wagner, John Wayne, Saddam Hussein, OJ, some say Donald Trump. Remember Don Vito Corleone?
Yeah.
And the 9, the peacemakers. These are people who are receptive to their environment. They play down their own presence. They may be loving, modest, and trusting, or stubborn, lazy, and soul dead. And they live in the world of accommodation. These are people that will, they're not at the healthy level, they will say yes when they really want to say no. And they want to be serene. And for that reason, they'll sweep things under the rug, they'll say it's not that big a deal, because they want their minds to be at peace. And they have to learn to be able to stand up for themselves sometimes and say no when it's appropriate. Examples of 9, Abraham Lincoln. Now some people put Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz here. The Dalai Lama, Carl Jung, Ronald Reagan. Remember Edith Bunker? Yeah. Marge Simpson, Walt Disney, and Princess Grace. All right, anybody getting any kind of a sense of like, geez, I think I might be leaning in this direction?
I feel like I'm a little bit of everything.
You are.
And
Yeah.
this is like a form of psychoanalysis?
No, I don't know that I would call it that, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because you are going to, it is going to illuminate unconscious parts. When I, remember I said there were 2 types I thought I was, and then I scored high in this 3rd type, and the more I read it, I thought, yeah, I do that, yes, So it illuminated something. And then that really was powerful in helping me gain more understanding and trying to have more compassion for myself, but also for everybody else. Anyone else have a question? Anyone else feel like they're leaning towards one more than the other?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's almost easier to look at and say, well, I'm not this, and I'm not this.
You know what? That is a great way to go about it. The process of elimination. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My assistant. Yeah, there are certain ones you could just check off probably. I know I'm not that, and maybe narrow it down that way.
What does it mean if you're trying to figure out everybody else instead of yourself?
Not a good sign. And that is the temptation. You can't help it. But for the personal growth, it's really worth figuring yours out. Yes?
Can you share the website regarding safety inventory? You said there was like a
Yes,
because
because it's on the handout, but and I think I even wrote, I'll tell you what it is. It's www.enneagraminstitute.com.
It's on your handout.
It's on the handout, and what I want to tell you is don't put the article the. That's a different website, Enneagram. Just www. And I think it's the first or second one on my handout with the bibliography. And what I added to, what's really neat, after you figure out your type, they allow you to go on their website. Now you do have to pay for the inventory, but once that, I think it's $12. Once that's done, you can go on the website and plug in your type, and every day you will get the Ennea thought for the day for your type. And let's say you do it, and you do it for 2 weeks, and it's not speaking to you. Well, then go to another one that you think might be your type. It hits my nail on the head, and every day. Some days my clients will say, oh, today I didn't like what it said, because when you go like that, it means it's hitting an area for you to work on. So that it's very well done. Any other questions?
Can you
Yes.
say the website again?
EnneagramInstitute.com.
So if you take the inventory and your company score like 5, 2, and then you have the 1.
Yes. Well, what they let you do now, this is new, you can plug both of them in, and they'll give you the thought for the day for 2 types. And you can start working with that.
Be 2 types, but
You
dominantly
you can
one?
be, no, you're gonna be one type.
Okay.
But I did it once they started this new thing of you can do 2 types. So I've been doing different ones just to see. I keep mine in, and then I get the thought for, boy, it's making it very clear. Nope, this is my type. So you can experiment that way.
Angela had a question.
Yes.
Is it helpful to discuss with people who know you really well?
Wonderful question. It is helpful as long as you bring some humility to it, because, you know, it's hard to have people say, you know, there was one thing in particular on my type that really, honest to God, couldn't see it. I actually didn't discuss it with anybody. I started paying attention and I saw, yes, I do that. But if you're open to discussing, especially if a spouse or an adult child, that'll say, oh yeah. And you know what's so wonderful? Science now, neuroscience can show us how, with the neuroplasticity of the brain, that you can create, you can wire the brain differently by the way you change your thought pattern. See, what happens is we have an emotion, and it turns into a thought, and then it leads into a behavior. So if you were to say, I'm trying to think of a good type to do this with. If you were to be, say, the achiever, and the emotion is how good it feels when you're recognized, and the thought then goes into how do I continue to be recognized, and then you really start overdoing your working or whatever, and you are just totally absorbed with yourself, then you've overdone it. And that's why these lines are very important. Because if you notice, each type has an arrow coming down to it and another arrow going somewhere else. You see what I mean? So what I'm going to look at, just to give you a sense of this, I just mentioned the achiever. The achiever, who is healthy, takes the positive traits of the loyalist. See type 6? See the arrow going to the achiever? And a healthy achiever is the kind of man or woman that gives credit to other people on his team. The unhealthy achiever, it's all about them, even though 4 other people worked on the project. I've heard people talk about a book being published and they had done a lot of work on it and their name's not even mentioned. So they have to pick, because the loyalist, a healthy loyalist is very inclusive, very relational. Loyalist has no problem giving compliments to other people. On the other hand, the achiever has an arrow going up to the peacemaker. Under stress, the achiever, who usually is like, you know, on fire with doing things, becomes almost lazy, the way an unhealthy 9 can be. They lose their zip. One of my clients who was is an achiever, he's married to a reformer, and boy, there were a lot of fireworks in that household. He, as a young man, just kept climbing the ladder, but he was not psychologically or spiritually very healthy, and things caught up with him. And when I met him, I guess he was in his late 50s, early 60s, he no longer had the kind of career he once had. And he almost became depressed, and then just kind of went into that, which a collapse that a peacemaker can. And so his task was to really look at some of the deceitful things he had done. And he was all about his image. 3s, the achiever, that's their most important thing, their image. And underneath that may be something not so good. And keep in mind, because I never want people to get discouraged, my clients, but they're working with me over a period of time, they learn to be joyful about their type, because when you first start studying it and you're like, oh, you know, yes, I do this and that, that's only a part of who you are. What I love, you mentioned, Eleanor, is this like psychoanalysis? What I love, the Enneagram fits in so beautifully with the psychology of Carl Jung, who is one of my most favorites, and I studied for a couple years at the Jung Institute. And Jung talked about the real self with a capital S, who it is that God meant for each of us to be. And the Enneagram helps you get that self. That's what's so beautiful. It points you in the right direction. Because once in a while somebody will say, more often men than women, well, I don't want to do this Enneagram. I feel it's going to put me in a box. Well, my teachers always say you are in a box. So when you understand more about your type, you get out of the box. Because the goal is not only to be the healthiest of your type, but to activate the good parts of the other types. So, you know, you may be a wonderful helper, achiever, or whatever, but you may not have much enthusiasm in your life. And maybe that's the thing you want to start developing. And that's what happened to me. You know, for most of my life, very, very serious. Oldest child, lots of responsibility. And I guess when I got into my 40s, I didn't know the Enneagram, and I was just starting psychological studies, but I realized I wanted to have more fun in life. And often we will marry the person that carries things that we haven't developed. That's the other reason I love doing the Enneagram, especially with my younger clients who haven't made any commitments yet, to understand more about themselves so they don't feel they have to go marry it unconsciously. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So it's like getting conscious about your own nature.
Your own nature and where your blind spots are, which we have a little exercise we're going to do with that. Okay, now, oh my gosh. Before we do the exercise, Don Rizzo, God rest his soul, and Russ Hudson always said that the keys to transformation and growth with the Enneagram is having a spiritual practice, which I gather, I feel sure everybody here does of some sort, and you can bring this into your life. And they talked about the steps of, and this is a nice little story here. Well, before I tell you the story, pay attention to what draws your attention, pay attention to what pushes your buttons and who pushes your buttons, pay attention to what you think a lot about and what you talk about. Okay, and they're all clues as to your type. So, Don and Russ say there's 3 steps to this transformation process. And the first step is to become conscious of your blind spot, conscious of your blind spots. The second step is to catch yourself in action. And number 3, make a different choice. And I'll give you a live example. Don Rizzo, he's deceased, he was a type 4, the individualist. When I was in training with him, he talked about being at a retreat, an Enneagram retreat, down at the seashore in an old Victorian house. And to stay there for the training, the price of admission was you had to agree to work on getting the paint off the outside of this house. So the retreat leader knew what he was doing because it was going to push everybody's buttons. So he said, middle of August, I'm out there scraping paint chips are sticking to me, it's sweaty. And they were told they could have a 45-minute break. And Don said, I flew in the house, which fortunately was air conditioned, went upstairs and fell asleep on one of the cots. Till he was rudely awakened by somebody who had to finish a task and was ticked off that he wasn't getting the full 45 minutes, stomped up the stairs, slammed the door, woke Don up. Type 4, the individualist, type 6, the loyalist, and type 8, the challenger. Those 3 types are called the reactive types. It comes right up. He jumped up and he said his impulse, he wanted to just knock the guy out. But he'd been doing his Enneagram work. So he became conscious what he wanted to do. And his second step was catch his type in action. And the third is to make a different choice. And he said, for the first time in my life, I saw my train coming into the station and I didn't get on it. Instead, he addressed the issue with the guy, but he did it in a civilized manner. So I use that metaphor with my clients, and they'll come in and say, Lenny, I didn't get on my train. And that's the change starting to happen. It's all so very positive. Okay. Yes?
What was number 3?
And make a different choice. Make a different choice. So the reformer maybe is just about ready to raise their finger and give a lecture. Maybe they put their hand down and decide, I don't have to address this. Okay? It's that catching yourself before you're going to do that thing that is automatic with you. And that's how you rewire that pattern in your brain. And after a while, I always say to my clients, it starts to become more comfortable. But it takes time because we're going against what we've been doing unconsciously for years. One of the things before we do the exercise, in the back of the room, I have a chart. Anybody that would like a complimentary either therapy session or coaching session, I would be happy to do it. Put your name, your phone number, and we'll set something up. And there's no need, no pressure to, after you do that, you got to sign on with me. But I'm happy to do that for the group, anybody who wants to sign up. I also have a flyer. I'm going to be doing a 6-week class on mythology and feminine archetypes in Radnor. So that's on there too. All right. Any questions before we break into groups?
Could you mention again the reactive types?
Oh, yes. 4, the individualist, 6, the loyalist, and 7, the enthusiast are the reactive types. Type 1, the reformer, 3, the achiever, and 5, the investigator. They're called the competency types. Competency, meaning those 3 types don't want to get emotional. If there's a problem, let's figure out the answer. 1, 3, and 5. They're competency types. They want to solve the problem.
What was the statement you made in the beginning? Online, you say, this is not about behavior, it's about
Motivation. So, let me put this here for a minute here. Okay, 2, type 2. Well, no, let me not do that one. Wait a second. Yes, type 2, the helper, 7, the enthusiast, and 9, the peacemaker. They're called the positive outlook types. They want to be happy. 2, 7, and 9. Now, 2s, if they can't help you and make you happy by helping you, you know, they will try to cheer you up. And the 7s, of course, are going to distract you. Don't worry about that. It's not going to be that bad. And the 9s, in their peacefulness, they want serenity, so they're going to try to be positive and see all sides of the situation. Okay.
Who are 4, 6, and 8 again?
4, 6, and 8 are the reactive types. Reactive.
So not the enthusiast, it's 8, not
4, 6, and 8 are the reactive types. Okay? 2, 7, and 9 are the positive outlook types. And 1, 3, and 5 are the competency types. There's a problem, we'll fix it. It really so helps in relationships too, you know? It's just so interesting. So now, what I have here, I'll explain it. You know, this part I might just give them to take home, because we're never going to have time to do this, but we can still do.
the group, and we'll probably we'll count off, we'll take our break before we do our group.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Everybody can,
Go to the bathroom or something.
Yeah.
Including me. Susan knows I have an overactive bladder. Susan's my doctor. Is she your doctor?
yes.
Susan Dallas Feeney is the best doctor in the world. Bar none.
Does what of this?
Which one is she? No.
I was just trying to say, like, when you had said, like, do this or this or this, and I said, which group is gonna do this and what group?
Well, we'll just count off, and what I'm gonna do is, this is called, this is another teacher of mine, Jerry Wagner from Chicago. He teaches at Loyola, and he's also a licensed psychologist. He's a 5, the investigator, and he's a wonderful teacher. This is called Enneagram sweet spots, blind spots, and hot spots. And when we come back, there's going to be a little border that's going to list the sweet spots for each 9 types, which the blind spot and the hot spot. The only thing is, it's numbered, 1, 2, 3. You've got to pay attention. 1's the reformer. But what I'm going to ask you to do, you're going to get in your group, silently, you're going to read what it says, check off what applies to you, and then share with the group. Then we'll come back and then we'll talk, okay?
Okay,
Why
so,
don't we count off now?
Yeah.
so we'll know where to go.
Yeah, but there's one lady missing, so we'll have to remember.
You know, I think that it looks like it's saved and that's an open
Alana's there, we'll
spot.
count for Alana.
So, do you need 5 groups, Lenny? We're gonna count to 5?
Yeah, that sounds good. Count to 5.
Okay, so Karen, will you start?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2,
3.
4.
4. 5.
Julie's 4, right?
Julie's 4.
Oh, 4.
Julie's 4, Sandra's 5.
Sorry.
That's all right. You're 1, 1, 2.
3, 4, 5. 1, 2.
3. So you just have to remember your own number, and it's confusing because we're investigating numbers too, but your number is so it's going to be 1, 2, 3 towards the center, 4 by those doors, and 5 by the piano or the organ. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, see you in 5 minutes.